Hello everyone, my name is Manu Waraku. I am SVP of Solutions for Operative. I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today entitled Building a Proprietary Audience Business, featuring Michael Green, analyst with Forrester Research. We're happy to have you on today to discuss a very important topic related to monetization of your audiences. As a company that's worked with publishers for a long time, we believe this is a very important topic for all of you to have as much information and education on this topic, and are pleased to have Michael as a featured speaker today. Michael serves interactive marketing professionals and specializes in B2B interactive marketing. He's a leading expert on B2B digital strategy, social marketing, agency selection, and most importantly, the online media buying ecosystem. Prior to joining Forrester, Michael worked at Jupiter Research, where he conducted research on interactive media and marketing, as well as consumer trends. Before I turn this call over to Michael and have him walk us through in detail in this webinar, I just wanted to give you a little bit of housekeeping direction. If you have any questions, please type your questions in the question box, and we'll take them at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to ask questions offline from this call and want to be able to reach us, please contact Director of Marketing Amy Inlow at AINLOW at operative.com. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Michael. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Manu, and thank you for having me today. So everybody is gathered here today to talk about audience. It's one of the most significant trends that we're seeing in the digital marketing space today. And what we're going to be talking about today is about building a proprietary audience business, something that's unique to you as a publisher. So what are our key questions for today? What do we hope to answer? Well, given that we only have an hour, I thought I'd keep it simple and short. Two key questions for today. Number one is, what's the business case behind this proprietary audience thing that everybody's talking about? Why do digital publishers need to consider building a proprietary audience business? And we'll talk a little bit about exactly what that means as we go through the presentation. Secondarily, we're going to talk about how publishers should approach this new market opportunity. What are their options for actually productizing and marketing a proprietary audience solution, and what's the potential for them as they go to market with these type of products. It's important to remember that no matter what your legacy business is, whether you are in television, in radio, or in print, or even a digitally native publisher, you have always been in the business of aggregating audiences, packaging them together, and selling them for advertisers. This may have taken various different forms depending upon the type of medium you grew up in. But audience has always been at the core of what publishers have been able to deliver for their advertisers. What's changing today is really the mechanism through which advertisers access those audiences and how publishers need to adapt to those changing ways of buying audiences. So for the sake of today's presentation, we're going to be talking about audience targeting as is defined by many buyers today. It's targeting based upon user attributes such as surfing or search behavior, demographic characteristics, or mindset, typically known as psychographics, that does not rely solely on specific site or content adjacency. For many premium digital publishers, content adjacency continues to be their bread and butter, the way you package, sell your inventory, and monetize the site that you have. But increasingly, buyers are looking for these new ways to actually purchase audience, and technology is changing the way they do so. Let's take a little deeper look at this technology evolution. It certainly altered the way that buyers and sellers have to think about reaching the right audience with the right message. Circle back to 2007. Some might consider this the pre-crash good old days of online advertising. Looking back at that year, not that long ago, there were essentially 3 different partners that a media buyer could go to if they wish to purchase audience through these technological mechanisms. There was Audience Science, once known as Revenue Science, Yahoo, who continues to put forward these products today, Dakota, which later became part of AOL through their Platform A consortium. Fast forward to last year, and we saw one of the most important changes that we've seen in the online media landscape in recent history. And this was the verifiable explosion of audience targeting options for advertisers. This came not only in the form of media partners, people like Audience Science or Dakota or Yahoo, who would package together audience data and media, but providers who would sell audience in and of itself, just the data behind this audience. Who are we talking about? We're talking about dedicated digital data providers, companies like Modem, companies like BlueKai. We're talking about traditional offline data providers, companies like Axiom and Targets Info. Across the spectrum, we saw different data providers come to the forefront of the marketplace with different types of data and really introduce buyers to this notion that they could buy audience even separate from media. This is a fundamental change. It opened up a much more fragmented media environment and gave these buyers many more options for how they can actually find and aggregate audiences than ever before. Clearly a very disruptive trend for any publisher, but an important one and something that has been embraced by the buying community. Certainly as part of this set, there are data providers that are putting together both context and audience. Pure39 is a really good example that is categorizing audience on somewhat of a contextual level. Some of the more social data providers as well, Media 6 Degrees comes to mind, also use content as very much so a proxy, similar to how traditional publishers have always done so. What's important to note, though, is that they're really separating this data from how the media is actually purchased, offering media buyers a way to buy this data in ways and put it together with media in much more flexible ways. So 2 critical factors are combined to create what I call the audience imperative for any digital publisher. Number 1, and we've spoken a bit about this already, is evolving buyer behavior. How buyers buy and what exactly they buy is changing and evolving quite dramatically. I've been covering this space for over 6 years now, and I've never seen quite as dynamic of change, I think, as I've seen over the past 12 to 18 months. Change is happening quickly and happening even at the lowest levels of buyers at this point in time. Also, there's a new competitive landscape that's emerging for publishers. Whether you're building products for it today or not, publishers are facing a more complex, more fragmented competitive landscape than ever, and they need to find ways to compete and compete successfully in this environment. We'll talk a little bit about what that competitive landscape looks like a bit later. But for now, let's focus on the buyer and how they're evolving. So last year, Forrester conducted a survey of major digital marketers. We were looking for marketers with significant digital ad expenditures. And we asked them which of the following would encourage them to increase their spending on online advertising. I often hear target in the market, and many of you I'm sure do as well, of the $50 billion global opportunity that's being missed in online advertising. Many other analysts talk about this like this is somehow inevitable, that ad spend is going to somehow magically catch up with media time spent. But if we look at it closely, history tells us that that simply isn't true. There are many different factors that drive ad spending to a particular medium. So we wanted to get at what are those factors that would drive spending to digital. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the nature of today's conversation, and perhaps unsurprisingly to you who've probably seen RFPs with audience targeting demands coming through the door, better targeting of ads came up number 1 when we looked at what would drive spending at 58%. Now, this is obviously very important. It means that the marketers themselves, those that send money down to agency buyers, are creating that type of imperative for their buyers. But I think it's also important to look at some of the other factors that are also leading into this audience targeting imperative. They're seeing success with it. They're looking at audience targeting and saying that it's getting them to their audience much more efficiently and with less waste in their process. They're also demanding easier ways to find valuable audiences online. Frankly, this has been a pain point. Despite this proliferation of data providers at this point in time, actually piecing together that data with the media, working with a variety of partners, can be difficult for any media buyer to really understand and any marketer for actually to task that media buyer to do. There's an opportunity here, this says to me, for publishers to make that process easier, offer audience in a more streamlined way for their agency and marketer partners. And again, they're also looking for less waste in the media buying process, especially as many marketers feel the pressure from the economy as they feel their budget's getting tightened. They're putting more and more pressure on their media buyers at their agencies to actually make the most out of their dollars. Audience targeting is one of the ways that they're looking to do so, and has thus become is the strong imperative for these buyers during this process. Of course, that shows that agency buyers are also taking note. They are, too, putting a priority on audience targeting. Just a couple months ago, we conducted a survey of major digital agency media buyers. We were looking for senior media buyers who were directing accounts with significant online display advertising spend, whether it's direct response-oriented advertisers or brand advertisers. It turned out to be a mix of both of these in this survey sample. Ultimately, we wanted to get to them, what were the most important things that they look for in publisher partners for display advertising buys? And I think the things that came up top two on this list are incredibly important here. Number one, by fractions of a percentage point, came reach to target audience. I want to talk to you for a second about what that means in this context. If we look further down the list, we see scale listed here. Scale has been traditionally a major asset for any media company, and it continues to be important. But what we found from buyers is that scale is really an enabler. It's an enabler for them to be able to find their target audiences with a significant amount of reach associated with them. So being able to deliver that audience with that scale behind it is what's important, not scale in and of itself, at least according to the media buyers that we surveyed. Second, also just behind that, by a fraction of a percentage point, came audience targeting capabilities. And specifically in the context of the survey, this was about this technology-driven targeting, behavioral targeting, demographic targeting, separating context from audience in order to find that audience. Things such as having guaranteed inventory, well, that's table stakes right now. We show it showed up at 0%. It's something that they assume all their media partners are going to be able to deliver for them, especially if they're working directly with a publisher. But having these targeting capabilities showed up as 50% of the respondents, incredibly important for the buying community today. We also wanted to get to how they're actually executing the buys. I get questions all the time about this concept of programmatic buying, how media buyers are changing the way they actually plan, negotiate, and manage their buys. So we asked these media buyers, which of the following best describes the way that they negotiate and manage their buys today? Despite all the hype that it gets in the market, programmatic buying, buyers who buy only through programmatic buying are actually in the significant minority among media buyers today. Almost all media buyers are using some form of the direct sales channel to actually plan and execute their buys. Only 10% said that their primary way of managing campaigns was through dynamic pricing based upon DSP or agency trading desk relationships. However, only 43% said that the main way that they manage their campaigns today was only via phone calls, emails, sometimes even faxes with publishers or network sales reps, that direct sales channel. 48% of buyers said that they negotiate through a mix of both the direct sales channel as well as programmatic buys. This is fundamentally different than anything we'd even see a year ago. The buying community is quickly evolving the way it buys, and it's looking to get the best of both worlds. It's looking to maintain those direct relationships, have that consultative sales relationship, get those things that only direct sales relationships can offer, but it's also looking for the efficiency and control that they're getting through the programmatic buying channel. Buyers are getting much more comfortable working both with direct sales teams, but also through DSPs, agency trading desks, and other programmatic sales channels to actually manage their campaigns today. This also means that agency buyers are turning to an increasingly diverse mix of media partners. Conventionally, and this still happens largely with traditional media, media buyers buy only from a small team of trusted publishers. When we went and asked media buyers, only 3% said that that was the way they primarily buy media today. 58%, a strong majority of those media buyers, is represented by the dark green circle, said that their team buys through a wide variety of publishers, as well as through demand-side platforms, again, getting at those programmatic sources of demand, as well as ad networks. They're looking to a diverse array of media partners, again, a very fragmented competitive environment, to actually meet their needs, buy in new ways, and find audience at scale. This is a fundamental change. Certainly we've seen over the past 3 years an evolution towards a more fragmented buying portfolio. Ad networks continue to be a strong source of demand in the marketplace despite many rumors of their imminent demise. They are evolving and still attracting dollars from advertisers. But what this says to me is the buyers are looking to buy through increasingly complex ways, increasingly more fragmented media partners, and are relying themselves on technology to help them manage these complex buying channels. This means publishers, too, need to think about ways they can access this demand through these increasingly complex channels. This leads naturally to the fact that digital publishers are also facing a new breed of competition, a much more complicated landscape for the dollars coming from these agencies. Today, I think it's fair to say that advertisers have nearly unlimited options for how they can spend their money on buying what many of them want, which is audience. The natural thing that comes to mind, and this speaks to the earliest days of audience targeting, is turning to portals. Major sites like Yahoo, MSN, and now the newly revamped AOL. Many of these companies for half a while only thought of themselves as competitors, or maybe thought of Google as a competitor. But the fact remains, if they invest more in premium content, they're increasingly becoming competitors for large digital premium publishers as well. Also, based upon these numbers that we're seeing from advertisers, you can't ignore ad networks as a continuing source of competition for these media buyer dollars. Many of them have gained a significant amount of expertise in packaging together audience segments from a diverse array of publisher partners, putting together marketing and sales packages around those, and then selling those to those same agencies that you're trying to fight for dollars. There's still significant competition when you think about building a proprietary audience business and how you're going to compete with these ad networks. Increasingly, we're also seeing that DSPs are a major source of demand. Advertisers, as we've seen before, and their media buyers are increasingly turning towards demand-side platforms to fulfill this programmatic demand. It's giving them increasingly high degrees of granularity, transparency, and control over their media buys. Companies like X+1, Churn, DataZoo, and Invite Media, which is now part of the Google stack, are beginning to command a significant portion of advertiser dollars. Earlier this year, Forrester did a white paper in conjunction with one of the supply-side platforms, and we projected that exchange programmatic media spend would be 14% of all display dollars in 2011. Much of that demand is flowing through DSPs today, and it's something that publishers need to be aware of and think about how they're going to plan to access that demand. I would also note that social networks are increasingly competing in this realm as well, but maybe not in the way that many publishers think. I get countless questions of, as a premium publisher, how should I be thinking about the competition for Facebook? Certainly, sites like Facebook, which now represents a significant number of display ad impressions in the market today, as well as other social networks like LinkedIn or Twitter, are amping up their display-like ad offerings, building relationships with advertisers and agencies, and trying to find new revenue streams. Certainly something that every publisher needs to think about. But in many cases, we're not seeing many advertisers or agencies set aside the same type of budget that they would set aside for, let's say, a premium digital publisher media placement. What I think is more important and more fundamental that every publisher needs to think about is really justifying the role of paid media in the overall equation. increasingly many advertisers are talking to me about, should I be taking money out of paid media and putting that into a social media plan, building up a Facebook presence, bringing in new workers to man my Twitter feed. So these social networks are competing against you on two fronts. One, they're competing for those display ad dollars, but also on a macro level, they're also competing for the attention and dedication of advertisers right now. Something every publisher needs to think about as they think about the role that social plays in their business strategy and maybe social plays in the data that they're putting forth and giving to advertisers. And finally, I think every publisher should also be aware of the new breed of digital publishers, many of which are basing their media businesses entirely off audience targeting and data. Many of these are coming from the e-commerce or retail world. I'm talking about sites like Amazon.com, Walmart, Expedia. Selling ads is not their main business, but it's becoming increasingly a lucrative second revenue stream for these companies. They're able to access vast amounts of shopper data, package that together, and then sell that off to advertisers. I think Amazon is certainly doing some very interesting things. They've made a deal with a demand-side platform, in this case Triggit, to be able to really arm their advertisers with that data and allow them to purchase inventory not only on Amazon but on other sites as well. They're increasingly becoming a force that every publisher needs to think about, especially when they're competing for audience targeting dollars. This new breed of publisher, really a whole new level of competition for publishers. So what does this all mean? Number one, it means that advertisers and agencies are getting audience targeting. It's a priority thing for them right now, and it's happening both through traditional and programmatic buying methods. This, in turn, means that your competition is more diverse and fragmented than ever. You can't afford to sit still in this dynamically changing competitive environment. It means you've got to evaluate your audience-related opportunities and find ways both to increase your share of existing spend with advertisers, but also find ways to tap into new budgets that are emerging as new options are bringing more advertisers online. And then finally, it means that the most successful publishers, the publishers that will win in the space, are those that are going to command a premium through both differentiated media, something that premium publishers have always been good at, but also differentiated audience data. You'll show both unique media, unique content, as well as the unique audience that attracts to your site. We're already starting to see some publishers step up to meet these evolving demands. We're seeing large, highly scaled publishers like NBC Universal building audience-targeted products to sell both across their direct and indirect sales channels, starting to meet both those types of demand, packaging together their unique audience with their unique media. We're also seeing more niche publishers like Forbes leveraging their audience data, both on their own site, but also working across exchanges, across ad networks to extend their reach and deliver new insights and new media opportunities for advertisers. No matter if you're an extremely large advertiser or a more niche publisher with high-quality audience data, you have to think about the ways you can marshal that data in a way that makes sense with your business model and takes full advantage of that way that data can effectively scale. So how can you do this as a publisher? How should you start going about this? Well, as an analyst, I like to think in threes. It seems to be the magic number in my business. So I'm advocating a three-step approach here for beginning to build your proprietary audience business. Step number one is going to be evaluate and control your data assets. We'll talk about in a minute exactly what that means. But until you understand what you have and understand how it's being used today, it's going to be very difficult to build a proprietary audience business. Secondarily is going to be about assessing your market opportunities, understanding who are these advertisers, how they want to buy from you today, what relationships you have, also what capabilities you can potentially bring to market based upon the type of data you have and the type of media you have to go along with it. And finally, and this is an area where we've seen many publishers stumble, the proof is in the pudding, right? It all comes down to execution, bringing together the business processes, the technology, and the overall structure to execute an effective go-to-market strategy, actually productize these assets you have, and bring them to market in a way that enhances yield for you as a publisher. So step number one, evaluating and controlling your data assets. Well, again, we're talking about a process that goes underneath that. The first thing I advise every publisher to do is start with a data audit. You got to understand what you have before you can even figure out if you have a market opportunity, right? You have to look at the multiple sources of data that could potentially come together. The first place so many publishers go is to look to third-party data providers. How do they overlap with their audience? But increasingly, I think that's becoming less important for these marketers as marketers are demanding more first-party data, and they're looking not only to find audience, but also looking to find differentiated audience that will command a premium as a product for you as a business. So look at your site-side audience behavior. What are people doing on your site? Look how that works with your CRM data. What are you collecting online about your audience today, form data, etc. Also looking at things like offline data, especially companies in the magazine industry tend to have massive offline databases that they've used to go out and market to their audience. How can you leverage that from an ad sales perspective? Secondarily, I'd advise every publisher to examine their current sales channels. Many publishers are already selling audience today, but many of them don't really know it. They're often selling it through third-party sales channels, things like ad networks or exchanges or SSPs that they may have relationships with. Identify these relationships, understand who they are, and talk to them about how they're packaging your media and data today. Talk to your advertisers about how they're buying your media and your data through these third-party sources today, so you can understand how these current sales channels are working, where they're being successful, and where they're perhaps taking some business that could be yours. And finally, identify unauthorized data usage. Data leakage is the term that's been promoted quite heavily in the marketplace. Many publishers I talk to are simply shocked when they actually use one of the many tools out of the market to identify how data is actually being provisioned on their site. Of course, it's really tough to build any kind of audience business if third parties are selling your audience without your consent. Using one of these tools to identify cases of unauthorized data use, things like the Media Trust or Crux are offering these tools today, can help you ward off unauthorized data usage and understand what's actually going on your site right now. Step number two is really about assessing your market opportunities. This is perhaps the most complex step for many publishers because the opportunities are different for every publisher, but there are many overall. The number one question is to ask yourself, which suits your data assets, what you have, but also suits the advertisers that you work with or have the potential to work with. And I think these fall into two categories. One I would call media-focused monetization, where the efforts are really about selling media, those ad placements to your advertisers, but also for some publishers could be data-focused monetization, selling those data, that data asset in and of itself to advertisers or other third parties who may have interest. So let's take a look at these media-focused monetization opportunities. The first one, again, that comes to mind for many publishers is third-party, what I call third-party data targeting. This is simply applying third-party data using something like a Blue Kai segment, an Exalate segment, maybe a Bezo segment if you're a B2B publisher, and applying it against your own inventory. This is increasingly a starting point for many publishers, but I often think that the next opportunity, first-party data targeting, is where publishers find the greatest differentiation and the greatest upside, especially if they have unique data or they're significantly scaled. It's about packaging together this proprietary data and media for a direct sales package. This means pulling that data off your site, pulling it from all those other sources that we mentioned earlier, and building a proprietary segment unique to the market that you can go sell to advertisers, something extremely attractive to advertisers right now. The third option, which is something that I think is a blend between media and data-focused monetization, is really an audience extension type opportunity. It's something I'd call the publisher trading desk. It's essentially the publisher conducting campaigns based upon their own audience segments on behalf of an advertiser. We often see publishers beginning to use demand-side platforms you think of only as a buy-side tool to actually go out, buy their own audience on other sites, and find additional reach for those advertisers. Especially useful if you tend to have an advertiser base who perhaps does not have a trustworthy relationship with an agency trading desk or a DSP or does not have a significant amount of budget to dedicate to them, but is doing a significant amount of direct sales business with you. It's a good way to complement those packages potentially. The other option is what I call pure data-focused monetization. First is first-party data sales. That's selling your proprietary data through open data exchanges, things like Xlate. It's something that every publisher needs to be careful of, right? Especially if they want to package it together for media-focused monetization. You could perhaps have some conflicts there. But certainly we see a lot of publishers thinking about what's proprietary to us, but not so proprietary that it's going to drive significant media sales, or maybe not useful for driving media sales, but is nonetheless going to be useful to somebody to package together in a pure data relationship. The second one I'd say is what I call RTB-enabled data cooperation. This is similar to first-party data targeting, as we saw on the media-focused side, but really the execution is through the programmatic channel. This is you offering up your set of audience data to that advertiser for them to go execute against your media through a programmatic mechanism. Publishers need to think about what kind of rules they're going to put around that data in terms of its ability to be used on other sites, but that's something that is going to differ for different advertisers and based upon how that data is priced. But certainly an opportunity we're seeing many publishers start to take today. Step 3 is execute. And it all starts with building the right products. As a publisher, you're going to have to decide whether you're going to build custom for every advertiser, go to market with a steady suite of ad products, say 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 10 different products that are baked into your stack and you can send out to the sales force, or you're going to do some of both. We see many publishers moving towards this hybrid model today. Secondarily, you're going to have to invest in the right technology infrastructure. Whether you're just from building audience segments to forecasting that inventory availability against those audience segments, publishers are going to have a more extensive tool set that's going to allow them to manage these more complex products and this more complex business overall. It's a significant challenge for every publisher today, but building those technology resources in-house and making sure you're armed with those capabilities is absolutely essential. And finally, and this is an area I believe that many publishers are overlooking today, it's about investing in the right personnel. Building out a proprietary audience business is going to require new skill sets, both from a technology side as well as sales and operations. What I often advise publishers to do, and what successful publishers have done, is look for people with strong analytical skills. Oftentimes they're coming from the buy side, maybe coming from an ad network. They have an understanding of the language of audience data and how it can be effectively used for a publisher. Bringing some of those people in-house and having them have that in-house understanding of audience, we find to be incredibly useful for any publisher. So let's sum it up before I hand it over to Manu for a few final words. Number one, remember that audience buying isn't going to replace content adjacency. Content is going to be every premium publisher's bread and butter. And media buyers tell us that audience targeting actually works best when content and audience work together. You need to find ways to deliver this value to media buyers through bundled products, through smarter packaging that brings together a wide array of ad products together to help your media buyers solve their challenges. Secondarily, it's about creating the right sales incentives. I see so many publishers struggle. They build the right products. They have brilliant ideas. They've assessed the needs of their media buyers appropriately, but their sales teams simply aren't armed with the right tools or have the right incentives to go out and change what they're doing. Selling audience is going to be a new skill set for almost all sales organizations at premium publishers. And there's no one-size-fits-all organizational model, but having incentives, whether they're hard incentives where people are actually tasked to go out and sell audience, or soft incentives where your sales teams are actually simply incentivized to go out and talk about audience, are absolutely critical to driving value in this audience targeting business and also bringing back feedback from the media buying community about how you can improve your audience products. And thirdly, it's about knowing your limitations. If you have limited scale or you have less valuable audience data, it means you're simply going to have different and perhaps less profitable audience targeting opportunities than large publishers or extremely data-rich publishers. You need to evaluate your priorities accordingly. Understand which products you should prioritize building, but regardless, you need to have a strategy for which sales channels you're going to go through, and how you're actually going to execute this audience targeting strategy. So if there's any takeaway I want you to have today, it's that you're going to need to prepare as a digital publisher for an increasing complex market. It's a fragmented landscape. You're competing against new types of competitors who are selling new types of products. Sales and ops are going to need to be ready. But you're also going to need structures, both organizationally and technologically, to help you manage this complexity. And I'm going to hand things over to Manu to talk a little bit about how Operative is helping with that today.
Thank you, Michael. I think this is a really excellent piece of analysis, and I appreciate the thinking and the deliberate approach you've taken to structuring the problem for publishers, or the challenge that publishers face. It is indeed a challenge and an opportunity, most importantly, for publishers going forward. I wanted to take a few minutes to just introduce Operative, and then we'll take questions that have been posted. And please go ahead and type in your questions in the questions box if you have some. Just to give you a brief introduction to Operative, we're a company that's been around for about 11 years, and we've been working with leading digital publishers and agencies to help manage about $6 billion in global advertising revenue used in our services and products. We work with companies such as MSN, NBC, Pandora, Turner, Dow Jones, helping all of them globally manage their businesses. I want to take a quick moment to talk about why is it that these companies use our platform. At the end of the day, as Michael talked about, ad sales and going to market is a complex execution, and companies such as that I've mentioned use our platform and services to help them do that. On the software side, we offer an ad business management platform called Operative One. It's a key technology in helping clients manage an end-to-end ad sales process, all the way from building a proposal to trafficking the ads and collecting the money associated with the sales that they have taken place. It helps clients integrate the systems and processes for sales, ad operations, and finance. Most importantly, helps them integrate, related to topic today, audience-based systems and data, and incorporate them into their sales motion. A key aspect of this platform is really about productization and building up the products and packages that you'll be selling. I just wanted to share with you a couple of examples of clients that use our platform today that are quite different in the way in which they use it. First is a client with a large base of unique users to whom they offer tools and technologies and information about products, ability to compare those products, including specs, reviews, and historical data. They use our platform to package that inventory into both content and audience-oriented products that they sell directly to advertisers. 90% of their business is selling directly to agencies and advertisers, and a small amount of it is sold through RTB-type exchange platforms. Their value, the leverage they get out of a platform like ours, is having a well-defined strategy associated with being able to sell their audience and really sell the products that they have to offer. On the other end of the spectrum is a very large publisher focused on local information needs and has a very large sales force that sells into the local markets that they have, where they have those sellers have ongoing relationship with the buyers. Their strategy, in addition to selling their own audiences and products, is to additionally put more inventory in the hands of their sales folks by using reach extension strategies that Michael talked about and buying additional inventory for their own audiences through RTBs, other publishers, aggregating all of that into sellable products and packages and offering them as their own. In both cases, the publishers are essentially taking audience data and using it to the best strategy given their sales focus and the way they sell. So a couple of things I wanted to just kind of highlight within the context of the notion of productization. Clients productize because it allows them to think about yield, analysis of that yield, and the strategy behind how they sell. Productization of your inventory is really about that. And audience is really a component of it. Across all the publishers we work with, we continue to see both the selling of audiences directly and audiences indirectly in the context of the content. At the end of the day, the reason people come to a lot of our publisher website is for the content. So in effect, without good content and without good adjacency to that content, these audiences just would not be present and would not be in a setting where the brands can have an impact on them. The key requirement that clients tell us that they have around this productization product is how to create and bundle products in ways that their clients want to buy, manage the process associated with selling. Just having a product is not sufficient. As Michael talked about the idea, a lot of publishers face a challenge of then taking those products to market. And the platform provides an ability for you as a publisher to manage that process, providing the right set of rate cards that need to be sold and pricing the products appropriately, analyzing that pricing information, and then creating the right incentives and monitoring those incentives within the context of the platform. So overall, what we find is this activity of productization goes hand in glove with the analysis that has taken place with selling audiences. So with that, I wanted to take some time and answer some questions that have been posted. So give me a moment. So one of the questions that's being asked is, so are advertisers considering spending less? I assume that this is in context of the social media results, and are they shifting budgets in a way where it's going to end up hurting the spend that's taking place?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's kind of on top of everybody's mind, and certainly it's something I heard after Q1 and Q2 from a lot of publishers who were certainly feeling significant pricing pressure from their agencies. We recently did some forecasting work where we broke down spending across the digital marketing spectrum and forecasted out for the next 5 years. I think the good news for every premium publisher in this room is that we found display advertising of all kind of established digital channels that include search and email as well to be the fastest growing segment there. We're looking at double-digit growth over those next years, and actually growth that's picking up over what we've seen over the past 2 years as the economy begins to rebound and we bring some more brand advertisers with significant dollars online. We're extremely bullish on the display market overall. I think the critical question that every publisher needs to ask is, though, as we grow the whole pie, the question's for whom? Where exactly is that money going to be going? As we face this increasingly competitive environment, how do you ensure as a premium publisher that those new dollars that are flowing online are going to be going to you as a premium publisher and to the products that you're offering, and not to some competitor in the premium publisher set, or I think even more importantly, not to some other means of actually executing a buy in this very fragmented media environment right now. So while advertisers are certainly thinking about some new channels such as social media, and that is impacting maybe today some of the dollars they're putting online, over the long term, advertising continues to work for them. It continues to be the foundation of how they think about their digital marketing plans, and we're fairly bullish on the display ad spending numbers going forward.
So in general, it seems like what you're saying is that overall the digital ad spend and the dollars and digital as a component of the spend is something that's growing. Is the expectation, or what do you hear from the buyers in terms of things that are keeping them from moving money over to digital? What are the type of things? I mean, this is not something that's in the survey, but I thought I'd take this opportunity to ask that question. I think that's something that's on people's mind constantly.
Yeah. From an overall perspective, and this is probably something that everybody can relate to, buying complexity is certainly top of mind. You compare digital buying to, say, television buying. I hear it from television buyers as well as from television sellers all the time. It's a really simple process. Still runs on phone calls and emails. I'm essentially selling two SKUs, right? You got a 15-second slot or a 30-second slot. When we look at the digital world, obviously there's a desire for much more complex products. People are trying to take advantage of everything digital that can offer, but actually getting there is really complicated today. So managing that very complex supply chain is certainly a major pain point on the buyer side, and working with publishers has continued to be difficult. So reducing that friction, I know it's something almost every vendor talks about, but few actually deliver on in the marketplace today, certainly needs to be a priority for the overall ecosystem going forward. Personally, I think the only way we're going to get there also, though, is to gain a little bit more trust between advertisers and publishers. It's certainly something that we've seen eroded quite a bit over the past few years, and there is a fair degree of suspicion, especially when it comes to things like audience targeting and how people are actually using data. Having an earnest, frank conversation about how they can reduce that friction in the buy and what mechanisms are actually useful and what are just unfortunate parts of the process today can head us to that better path. But reducing that operational friction is certainly a major inhibitor today, and I think that the biggest gap between getting to that $50 billion, closing that $50 billion gap.
So changing tacks a little bit, one of the important aspects of what you talked about is scale and getting to audience scale. And one way clearly clients can get to it, publishers can get to this, is by cooperating in terms of pulling audiences together. They're like-minded or they're similar or overlapping to get to the larger things. Now in the traditional media, this was done by simply creating relationship, right? So Knight Ridder essentially bought a lot of regional papers, and they became, as a result, a global reach, had a larger audience. How do you see that? Do you see that happening on the digital side at all, or is it all in the nature of the networks still controlling it, or are publishers getting into bilateral relationships as well?
Yeah. These bilateral relationships are certainly a big part of the ecosystem today. I think we see things like Quadrant 1, which is a consortium of many different newspapers that have local markets that they're packaging together to sell off on a national level. I think that's a great example of publishers coming together and finding innovative ways to package their inventory. It's not fighting against what they're trying to do on a local level, but opening up new opportunities to them to grab a larger share of the pie overall and bring new budgets on board. So certainly we're seeing these agreements come about. The biggest pain point we've seen in these has been simply managing these has been increasingly complex for publishers. Publishers often have very different businesses, right? Different seasonality, different products that they're offering today, and reconciling the business rules around how these economics work or managing flexible business rules for the different types of publishers that are part of this consortium can be very difficult. So it's going to require structures, tools, technology, but also the right strategic personnel to create a framework for this actually to be successful. Certainly we've seen a lot of publishers express interest in this, especially in the exchange environment, where being able to aggregate a lot of demand against inventory is certainly very, very compelling. But they're balancing that against the fact of, could we just aggregate that in and of ourselves at our current scale level? So there is that careful balancing act, but it's something every publisher needs to be considering. And obviously there are many opportunities now for publishers to find innovative ways to extend their audiences and find reach. Building these bilateral relationships, building publisher consortiums are just one of those tasks, and it depends upon what relationships you have and how you can agree upon those business rules. But certainly a good opportunity for publishers to think about.
And to a certain extent, it almost sounds like they should be, even if you're a pure digital publisher, looking at like-minded models outside of the digital world is a good place to think about how you should be approaching that problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's so many differences between digital and traditional media, but many of the elements of traditional media would, I think, be very welcome by buyers to have them be introduced in digital. I think the thing that scares me the most is when we take markets that are very simple and then try to apply some of the zany digital logic that we've created against them. Personally, I've been very skeptical against of much of the innovation that's happening in TV. It's something that works great for publishers. It works great for buyers today. They build agreements among publishers and amongst buyers that seem to be working with them. I think digital could learn a lot from what's gone on in the traditional media, even though the complexity is obviously going to be there.
So there's a good question here. So let me just read this because this is a well-involved question. So it says, do you think buyers are losing the plot a bit with the data opportunity? For example, one buyer asked me if I could target pregnant women who were scheduled to deliver in March. My guess is that they would think that asks the question of any other type of media, like using CTR as a performance metric in branding campaigns. This is a fair question. I think that in general, there's a perception, right? And I think some of it comes from the AdWords and the whole performance side of the business, and it's being brought over to the display side to a certain extent, to the detriment potentially of display, or not. But what's your thoughts on that? What is the conversation like today out there in the buyer community related to this?
Yeah, buyers have incredibly varying degrees of sophistication when it comes to their understanding about how audience targeting can be used and used effectively. Clearly, as you get to more and more narrow of a target, your reach opportunity is naturally going to decrease. There are only so many pregnant women who are set to deliver in March. Every advertiser needs to evaluate how effective that's actually going to be for them and if it's worth the additional cost. I think as a publisher, what you're really haggling about there is, one, you have to figure out, can you actually deliver on that, but also at what price are you going to, given the operational complexity that's going to actually create for you and the cost of actually getting to that granularity of data. So on the right terms, yes, a publisher could absolutely do that. But what it says to me is that publishers do have an opportunity to be a little more consultative with these type of marketers who maybe aren't as sophisticated in terms of how they want to use data today, but know that they want to use data. Advise them that perhaps this isn't the best way to get at what they're trying to do. Take a step back, look at what their business goals really are, and then find ways to package together audience and content that's going to help them meet the goals. So when an advertiser comes in and has a request that seems somewhat ludicrous, it's a fair opportunity to reframe that conversation and show that you can help them through a variety of other products as well.
Well put. I think that is indeed really what needs to happen. And to a certain extent, I think that you talked about this in your presentation, where the sales teams have to be armed with the education as how to match the publisher's audience to the content that they're seeing and the event that's taking place. And I think to a certain extent, as you said, publishers have had this historically. They haven't been able to necessarily package it up as well and cleanly, but certainly have had that. So I think we have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you a question about, what is, to a certain extent, one of the things you're talking about is having a strategic outlook to your business in terms of approaching the audience things. What are you finding? Who within the organization at publishers is best suited to be the owner of this in some ways?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the biggest challenges speaking to many of the vendors who are trying to sell into these type of people is that they're having a difficult time identifying that person who's leading these relationships. We've seen organizations take very different tracks. Some have extremely savvy heads of digital sales who've been ingrained in digital, perhaps come from a background in digital, and really understand data and technology. We see other people bringing aboard somebody who's in charge of data business development, somebody dedicated to building out these data products. In other organizations, we've seen ad operations really take the lead in identifying these market opportunities based upon trends they're actually seeing in the ad server queue and through the systems they work with, and pushing those up the ladder. I say overall, though, I think the last point I just made on the ad operations side is something that I'd say across the board we need more empowered ad operations organizations. Typically, what I find is that in other industries, operations truly is a strategic function. And I think in the digital media world, we've undersold our ad operations organizations quite substantially. The amount of insight that they can actually glean from being down in the trenches day to day needs to be pushed up through the organization and can play a very important role in actually managing the execution of these campaigns. I don't think there's any one right title for the person who's going to be running this, but there is that right skill set. Somebody that can pull data from down in the organization, package it together in a strategic way, but knows how to communicate to both the sales team, project management teams, as well as operations people who actually have to execute on this to bring it to market. It's going to be a diverse skill set, but we find that many publishers have somebody like that in their organization. It's merely getting them empowered and in the right position to actually act.
Excellent. So there was one last question here, which is talking about, is there a shift in terms of publisher that you see attempting to collect more data? Now, I suspect every publisher wants to collect more data. The question is, what is the strategy behind collecting? So could you share some examples of where, traditionally somebody has not collected data, or they're using some strategy to collect more data, either directly or indirectly?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you actually go about in doing this? We see a lot of publishers today, from a technology perspective, looking into the data management platforms, often known as DMPs. These are tools that are good not only for being able to pull data off their own site, but also to be able to aggregate data from a diverse amount of sources. Again, looking at all the data potential that you really have and being able to piece it together and segment it in a way that's actionable across a variety of platforms. That's an absolutely critical part of the data stack. What we're beginning to see, I think this is happening a little more in the European market than in the US, is publishers and advertisers actually working together to form cooperative agreements in terms of the way data is being used. Third-party data providers are certainly less prominent in the European market than what we've seen in the US. It's forced advertisers to go more to publishers as a way to match their offline data with their online data. So they're forming these agreements, and we're beginning to see some innovative publishers, especially in some innovative markets like the Netherlands, being able to work with those advertisers to say, we'll have access to your proprietary data, we'll give you access to our proprietary data, and we'll form some cooperative agreements to be able to both extend our data pools. It's something you don't want to maybe do with every advertiser, but if you have a trusted relationship, strong media partner, it's certainly something to consider if you both have significant data assets to bring to the forefront.
Right. So don't treat the advertiser like the enemy, so to speak, and be sort of a little bit out of the box and approach your advertisers to see if they're interested in cooperating on that. Great point there. So we're out of time at this point. Thank you all for attending. I did want to point out that this webcast will be available for rebroadcast at the end of the session, so please feel free to redistribute and have others in your organizations listening. I wanted to thank you for taking this hour and spending the time and asking great questions. Thank you very much. Bye.